Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thank you. Before I introduce our guests, I just want to acknowledge and thank Jane Hamilton from Faith and Family Hospice, who provided the refreshments today. Thank you. Yep, that was very nice of her. This is an amazing crowd. I know that Jim and Phil already did this program at the library, but wow, Jim said wherever he goes, people follow him, so I believe him. It's Phil. Okay, sorry, Jim. Phil. Jim Detilio and Paul Philip Chekarowski. Thank you. I practiced and everything, and it just went out of my mouth. Here to present Walpole Then and Now. Thank you. Who's first? Phil.
So thank you, Debbie, and thank you, Carrie, for hosting us. We're very excited to have this opportunity to present our photographic exhibit one more time. So my name again is Philip Shaharevsky. I'm the president of the Friends of the Walpole Public Library. And this exhibit started when the Library Friends did a series of talks during 2024 on the anniversary of the founding of Walpole. And in doing those talks, we decided to also do a photography exhibit of then and now, what Walpole looked like 100 or more years ago and what it looks like today. So we worked with the Walpole Historical Society and Johnny Anderson, and we worked with and his wife Susan, and then myself and Mary O'Brien, who is a member of the Library Friends Board. And so we went through a lot of photographs. The Historical Society has an extensive collection of pictures of Walpole. If you've never had the opportunity to go in, they're open on Saturdays, usually 1 to 4. It's worth going in. You'll be amazed the photographs they have, and all carefully cataloged. So we went through and we picked out 26 historic photographs. And then I actually did the scanning. We scanned them, and they're high-resolution scans on a very high-resolution scanner, an Epson 850V, V850V, if you know scanners. So they're very high resolution, up to 100 megapixels. And then Mary and myself went around and we photographed each of the locations. And actually, it was more complicated than you might think. For one thing, sometimes we stood in a street and risked getting hit by a car to get just that right angle. But also, sometimes it was really hard to see exactly how that original photograph was taken, and we tried to be as accurate as we can. And it was a lot of fun for us. So that was what we did. So then we framed the pictures. There are 26, so there's 52 altogether. They're framed 16 by 20. And we had an exhibit in the Walpole Library Community Room for 3 months. Now, this exhibit was only possible because of the generosity of Alice LaRusso. And I really want to highlight her because she gave a contribution that allowed us to get to do the scanning, but more importantly, to buy the frames. And we had them professionally printed by Color Tech Boston, who did a really good job. So I have 6 of the pictures here, the then picture and the now picture. So at the end, you'll be interested in looking at them. And I would say that the exhibit was probably the most attended exhibit that we've had at the library community room for when we've done for either our exhibits or other things that the Friends have done. Last, just to say that the photographs are probably going to go to the library. So we were looking for a home for them, and that's tentative, but that's probably what's going to happen. And you may see many of them hanging in the library at some point. So now we're very pleased to have Jim Detilio come along, who is a resident of Boston, Walpole, grew up here, and also has a huge interest in the history of Walpole, and gave a presentation, and he was able to add a lot of detail, which really made it a lot more interesting, because neither Mary or myself neither of us were born in Walpole. So that was the beginning of this presentation, which Jim now will take over. So I want to introduce Jim D'Attilio, and again, I want to thank him for giving a really riveting presentation. When he did it at the library, I can tell you people were really interested, and there was a lot more dialogue going back and forth about where places were and how things had changed. So please welcome Jim D'Attilio.
Thank you, Philip. Hi, everybody. Thank you. That's more applause than I deserve. Philip and the Society of America, they did so much work putting this all together. I'm just a former history teacher that is used to standing in front of a bunch of... The great thing is I don't have to worry about disciplining you and getting you to behave. Yeah. So I had a lot of years of that, but I can see that those skills will go unneeded today. There's a couple of you I'm not sure about, but we'll hope so. I'm going to stick this here because, okay, so real quickly, I grew up fascinated by history, and when we gave the talk back in the winter, I started out by saying that, I grew up in Walpole. Our home was right on the edge of the town forest. And when I was about 5 years old, I went way up to the back of our backyard, which overlooked the town forest. It was kind of a glacial esker. It's part of the old Plimpton property that much of it became town forest. And I looked down over the hill, and I could see stone walls all through the woods. And there was a field further in, and there was a tractor. You're 5 years old, and you see a tractor in the woods behind your house. It's like, wow. What's that? So I went running in the house, and my older sister, Patty, was in high school. Actually, no, I was 5. She was actually in nursing school by that point. I said, oh, there's a bunch of stone walls in the woods behind the house. And she said, what the heck are you doing all the way in the very edge of the backyard up in the woods? I said, well, I just wanted to see. She said, you should go back there. But okay. And then she explained to me about the stone walls. Well, it used to be all farmland. How can it be farmland? There's trees everywhere, Patty. And then she said, the trees grew up. It was farmland a long time ago. So anyway, she made me promise not to disappear into the woods again because I'm only 5 years old. And that promise lasted probably until the next summer when I was like 6, and I went over the wall again. And by the time I was like 8 or 9, I had investigated right to the borders of town forest, including right behind this building, right up to where the railroad tracks were. I had covered every square foot of Walpole Town Forest and found all sorts of things that were fascinating. And that was sort of like the beginning of my whole interest in history. Later on, I became a history teacher. My BA was in history and political science, but I don't like to mention that. I'll stick to the happy part. So anyway, and I studied historical research. And one of the reasons I didn't go into historical research or anything like that was proven by, I have some notes here that I made. When Philip gave me the photos and said, okay, I said, okay, and I wanted to get some facts. I knew a lot, but I wanted like particular dates and things like that. And when I did it, it was one of those cases where, suddenly, it's right after dinner, I sit down on my computer, and the next thing I know, it's like 12:30 after midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And that was what used to happen to me in college when I took historic research classes, and we're looking into historic documents and everything. Next thing I know, I'm closing the library. I'd go in there at 4 o'clock, and the library's closing, and they kick me out. And what have I done? So I realized it's too dangerous. I'm addicted to historic research. When I go into the rabbit hole, you need to have a rope around my ankle to haul me back out. So I avoided that. But then when I came along to do this, I went right back down the rabbit hole happily. So I'm glad this starts with one of my favorite buildings. In fact, is this thing working? Oh, it is if you point in the right direction. Oh, no, I had it in the right direction. Are you working? Oh, it's so tiny you can't even see it. Those two little windows right there are my office. I work actually in Old Town Hall. Okay, so, one other thing, caveat, before we go on. This is not a lecture. This is just facts. If anybody has a question, or you have an anecdote or a memory about anything that you see, share it. Stick your hand up, yell. Whatever. This is not like, you have to sit there like when you were one of my 11-year-olds in class. Feel free to interrupt with an anecdote, a question, a memory, anything. This is sort of a group thing, so please feel free to participate. Okay, first off, this thing was actually called the townhouse when it was built. It was referred to as the townhouse for decades. It didn't become known as town hall or referred to as town hall probably until well into the 1900s. They used to refer to it as the townhouse. Built in 1881, I wrote down some facts, obviously, because I have no memory for numbers. It cost $29,322.65. They were very careful on the accounting. They purchased the land for $1,800. The land, there had been a tavern on the land that was torn down to make room for it. I'm sure many tears were shed at that time because it was Clapp's Tavern. And there were multiple Clapp families, but this is the Clapps with 2 P's at the end of their name. They actually owned a big chunk of land to the left of Town Hall and behind. You can see one of their barns there. Their home was there. There's a stable there. There was much more land there. So they purchased this little tavern, the land that it stood on. The tavern had actually been there for well over 100 years. It actually appears on a map in 1732, a map of Walpole. And in fact, the tavern was kind of a little bit famous. President James Monroe actually visited there because he did a walking tour of parts of the country, including New England. He walked all the way, I think it was from Wrentham, I believe, to Dedham, and he stopped there. And so it was famous, and yet they tore it down. But they built a nice building in its place. So the 70-foot clock tower originally had a bell in it. At some point in later years, the bell was removed, and then it disappeared. There's a lot of speculation, but there is absolutely no record of what happened to the bell after it came out of the tower. It went missing. The clock is wound by hand. It's fascinating. Members of the Town of Walpole Building Maintenance Department actually go up there. There's 3 or 4 guys that are trained to hand wind the clock and adjust it, and they go all the way up there, which is kind of rickety at the last part. I actually went up there with them one day, and I only made it about 3/4 of the way. I'm not great with heights. I don't even wear thick socks. But they go up there and they wind it every week. It's really a fascinating. They videotaped themselves so I could see it because I couldn't make it all the way up there. Some other interesting thing, the basement doesn't go all the way to the front. If you notice, since my little pointer is not all that great, not that powerful, I think you're all familiar. This part of the building bulges out. The basement is only under the rear 2/3 of it. It sort of ends when you get up to the front. Some other fun things. As we all know, at one point, obviously this was the police station from the 1980s until next door was built, but the police had operated out of Town Hall before 1950s when the combined police and fire station was built behind Town Hall. In the 1800s, it was initially just 2 constables. There was no police department. So the constables operated out of there for years. There were actually jail cells in there with iron bars. Now in the 80s, when they converted to police station, they put in modern cells where the cells are. But there's still one little part of the basement that has the old iron bars there, which is fascinating to look at. It's really a lot of fun. The upstairs, the second floor was a huge meeting room. And that is probably one of the most well-known parts of the building, which is fundamentally gone. I want to read the list. It was a beautiful room, and you can see parts of the way it was, and it actually had a huge balcony that people could sit in, or sometimes they would have musicians up there. It hosted town meetings, district court, dances, including the when they opened the building and so forth. They danced till like 4 in the morning. Concerts, several Walpole High School graduations. It hosted basketball games, if you can believe it. Footlighter's very first production was in there, and they performed there for a number of years until they had to go elsewhere looking, because the room kept getting modified for other purposes, and they went on sort of on the road, different places for years until they ended up with a building that Charles Bird gave them over near Bird Park. It hosted Walpole's first movie. And even in one of the things I found, because they had to ask permission, it was in town meeting, in the 1890s, temperance meetings were held up there. Now, one of the fascinating things that people always mention when they see this photo, notice that it's at street level. There's a driveway that goes around the front. Yes, at that time, Main Street was the street level was much, much higher than it is now. And we'll get to that later on. So let's see. So, Philip. And there we are today. You can note that it's much higher now than the street level. They've added the stone wall. They added, behind that bus thing is actually the stone stairs that were built back in the early part of the 1900s. When they lowered the road, they built a beautiful set of stone steps. But when they turned in the police station, they basically locked those doors. They buried the walkway or tore it up. But they built a wall at the base of the stairs and filled it in with dirt. The steps are still buried underneath there. A lot of interesting things in Walpole got buried, but we'll probably hit on that. Let's see. It was remodeled in 1931, which enlarged the police department in the basement, and eliminated the downstairs meeting room. There used to be a big meeting room downstairs. That became offices. Upstairs hall was renovated in the 50s to make it more of a district. After it was district court, it was converted to offices. The district court, which met there regularly up until then, they had like 2 days a week was criminal court, 2 days a week was civil court. In the 50s, they moved to the new courthouse over in Rentham, so it was then available, so they wound up just making it all into offices. You can still see remnants of it. You can walk around, but you can get a feel for what it once looked like. It's very interesting. Actually, one of the people at Walpole Historical Society, which I'm a member of, she's working to organize a tour of it sometime in the not too distant future, a tour of Old Town Hall, such as it is. It is being used by the town for excess office space. So it was renovated in the 1980s to become the police station, and it underwent a lot of drastic changes, and not the least of which was that the police officers would go up to the balcony area, which is now there's now a floor where it used to be open ceiling, you could see the remnants of the gorgeous open ceiling and woodwork that were up there, and they used it for target practice. Yeah, so that's a little bit funny. Okay, hang on. I've got one of the things I have to make sure is I've made my little flip book. I got to make sure I flip them in the right direction. Okay. Then, okay. All right, one of the things I mentioned that they had to lower the center of town. I'm going to take my mic with me. If you look over here, notice the steep drop off. You can actually see the hill disappearing down there. Back at that time, the hill was so steep that most of the buildings, and some of them are still there today, they actually all had steps that came down to the street because of the tilt. One end would practically be at street level, and the other end of the step would be like 3 steps down, 4 steps down, because the hill was so incredibly steep. So they dug all the gravel up here. They dropped it approximately 6 feet. You can still see the driveway there. The trees are much bigger now. And there were streetcar lines there. And they used that to fill in from the intersection down the bottom to raise it up. So that came up, and up at the middle center light went down. it was cut by, I'm sorry, I said 6 feet. It was cut by 5 feet. This one I love fact I found. They talked about doing this for several years, and they had to keep delaying the project because there was difficulty. They couldn't get the streetcar line to actually come in and move their rails, take the rails up so they could do it, and put the rails back. So this is obviously before that. And they dragged their feet because they didn't want to, spend the money to go pull up their rails temporarily while the street was regraded. So it's interesting. Now, to date the photo, when I originally saw this photo, it was dated, I think, I want to say, oh gosh, I can't, 1901, I'm sorry, something like that. But it isn't. It's actually later than that. And the reason we know that, this building here is you'll all sort of recognize that. It looks very similar to as it is today, the Oddfellows building. That's not it. It burned to the ground years ago. There actually was a previous one that was wood framed, which burned to the ground. The Oddfellows used to meet in it. And they wound up, when it burned down, they purchased the property and they rebuilt it. And this is the one they rebuilt in 1912. So that's how we know that this picture is post 1912.
Plus, if you look at her dress, her hemline is
this is this is after 1912, and the road hadn't been regraded yet, so which took place later. Some interesting things about it. You notice the phone company symbol in the window, and let's see, Fullerton's drugstore was there, and the H.M. Boyden and Company. But one of the interesting things was in 1912, Walpole Co-op began, and they were on the second floor. This was their first home, and that was in 1912. The very first, they moved in the day after they were incorporated to it. Across the street, which you can barely see, right here, notice the ornate facade here and all that. That's actually the side of a house, or their sort of garden wall, whatever. There was a big house that stood there for many years, and it was the Horace C. Biggs home. And eventually that was bought. Do you know who bought it? What? Who was it? No. New England Telephone. They moved from over there and they built a building over there. You all remember the cute little original bank building that we all probably grew up with, and the Walpole Co-op before they added on to it in every direction by 10 feet. That was originally the New England Telephone building until the 1950s, and in the 1950s, they built the big one further down the street on the next corner, and they moved there, and the phone company, and the co-op moved across the street into their old building, and that became the co-op. One of the other things, where am I? There's some fact I didn't want to leave. Okay, you can still see, you can make out some of the Clapp family buildings still in the back, which were still there. Mrs. Clapp used to rent barn space because she had a huge barn there and a stable. She used to rent barn space to the fire department, which by that point existed. There was at some point, the fire department did have some use of the back of the building. One time I did read or saw somebody talking about in the back of wall of the building, there's 3 large arches, thinking that was originally the fire department. One of those was always just an ordinary person doorway. The other one, I think, was always a person doorway because the stone slabs are not cut. The third one over was always a big doorway, like a stable door. And eventually, when you look through the records, you could see that the early fire department, when they started to mention them at the turn of the century, they stored some equipment in there, but they also stored a lot of it in Mrs. Clapp's barn. Mrs. Clapp is going to come up several more times because this was sort of a ongoing thing. And you can see the chapel of the old Congregational Church down there in East Street. Anyone know what's there now or what was there? Gallows, yeah. Nobody could tell me, as anybody could actually tell me the name of what's there now? Or the three things that were there before it? No, and I couldn't remember them myself. They were so unforgettable to me. It's always going to be Gallows, which was built there. Okay, so let's see. I want to make sure I get to the next slide, for which I need. Okay, there we go. Two hands. Oh, all right, let me flip my.
This is one of the ones that.
Oh yes, I got to mention that. Yeah, Philip Chikorowski, risking his neck for history. You notice where the line is. So where was Philip? Standing, and that's a busy intersection. Anybody that like to stop? How long did you run? Take the picture and run?
I took it fast.
Yeah, he took it fast. Yeah, Phil risking his neck for you. So, and as you can see, much has changed. The Clapp properties have long since gone, and there was a series of buildings. That's not even the first one that replaced it. I remember as a kid the old Walpole bakery that was there, and there was a furniture store. And as a kid, yeah, oh yeah. But when I was a kid, Walpole Bakery was in the white building that stood here, which was wonderful. I will never forget the chocolate frosted donuts. Something I'm still paying for today, evidently. Now you can also. Oh, could you go back? Yeah, you can see now the newer version because the other one burned down in I forget, it was 1930s, I believe. And you can also see that the Orthodox Church steeple is long gone. Anybody remember the event that took it out? Hurricane of 1938 took off the steeple, damaged the building beyond repair. Yeah, so, okay, we're ready. All right. When this opened, who can tell me what it was? Not Bird. Oh, it was the new center school. It was the new center school. It was later referred to as the Old Stone School. And actually it was referred to as the Stone School because they didn't start calling it the Old Stone School until they built the new Stone School. So it was just the Stone School. But for the first, I forget how many decades of its life, it was known as the Center School because the Center School was up on Front Street where Front and Common meet. No, next to it. Next to it, the white clapboard house that is the parsonage for United Church, that was the old center, not that building, but the foundation, that was the old center school. What happened is that the town, at the time, it had burned down. Let's see. Yeah, it burned down a couple of years earlier. This lot had actually been purchased by the Methodists. They were looking to build a Methodist church. And they bought that land, probably off of Mrs. Clapp, who we'll come back to again. And the town had the burnt out lot over there. And they went into some talks with the Methodists, and they decided to swap parcels. The town gave the Methodists the parcel where the center school had been, where the parsonage is now, and the Methodists gave the town that. So they built the new center school here, and that foundation became the Methodist Church. There was actually a Methodist church there. I wish we had, we have photographs of it. It was actually quite a pretty building and large. There's a lot more history about that. So this became the new center school. Parts of the Stone Street, or the street was the new part. By the way, anyone know what the name of this street is? It is now, but at that time it wasn't even considered a street. It was called Mud Alley. It was a muddy path that went down and connected further down. And eventually, very quickly after the building was built in 1885, it became known as Stone Street, possibly named, and the school very quickly, within like 10 years or so, eventually became, it was renamed in 1902. Glad I have my notes. So it went nearly a couple of decades as the center school. And this probably had nothing to do with it, but the chairman of the school committee at the time was Dr. Stone, and his father, Dr. Ebenezer Stone, had also been on the school committee and so forth. So that may have had something to do with the renaming and and this became an extension of Stone Street and so forth. Some interesting facts about it that I found. One of the most interesting ways to find out information is town reports. Back in historical research class, and this is the thing that got me in trouble, we're looking at primary documentation for historical research, and town report, Walpole has amazingly detailed town reports that went back a long, long way. And these things were like beautifully done in excruciating detail. And you could find all sorts of interesting things in there. This was closed upon completion of the new stone school. It was 1950. 5 of the classrooms ended up getting renovated and reopened because 1950s, I am a product of what is known as the post-World War II baby boom. Besides Walpole growing, there were a lot of kids showing up. And 1950s is when we all started showing up. I was right around the peak at 1956 or so, and they were starting to run out of room in the schools right about 1950 when the first of these kids were starting to hit school age. So they renovated 5 classrooms and actually reopened them. I have friends who were in first grade and they actually went over there even though the place had been closed for years. They wound up in there. And so it was reopened in 54. It was closed for school use in 77. The town rented it out as a YMCA site for a few years, and then it was closed permanently and demolished in 81. And it became a volleyball court. Anyone remember the volleyball nets out there for years? And when they decided to build the library, there was a great hue and cry from the volleyball players. Where are we going to go? So they were given a place up at Adams Farm to put up the volleyball nets, and they were fine with that. And here's one of these little facts that if you really scour those kinds of municipal records, you stumble across little goodies like this. In the 1906 annual report, it notes, town meeting voted to authorize the sale of the outhouses at Old Stone School. Or, excuse me, it's Center School. It was still Center School at that point. As soon as the principal states that they will no longer be needed. They were putting in bathrooms in the basement, I guess. You know, when I was a little kid, we always and I went to Plimpton, I went to an old school, and they always referred to the bathroom. They never said, "May I go to the bathroom, please? May I go to the lavatory?" No, we didn't know that word. Can we go to the basement? And it comes from many schools. That's where the first plumbing was added to pre-1900 school buildings. So, so that was just a little fact. When I came across that, I said, really? And what it doesn't tell me is who actually bought them and how much did they get? I've been curious about that ever since. The one probably notable fact is I'm sure they did sell, because in 1902, very few homes had indoor plumbing in Walpole, and I'm sure those things were a valuable commodity to get your hands on. Yeah, we need a 2-holer or 4-holer or whatever. Okay, so onward. And here we are with Philip risking his neck in the snow. And looking at it now, you can see obviously this is taken beside Blackburn Hall. You can see the new library in the distance. Town meeting records record the vote to purchase the portion of land from, I believe it was again the Clapp family, exchanging it with the Methodists to get that piece of land originally. And now there it is. And you right down the you can barely see it, but that's the telephone exchange building that was built in the 50s. So right across the street from it. So that's a fascinating one. All right, let's see. Let me get to the next one. And I should have put these pages. I should have put them a little differently. Only because I keep forgetting. Okay, which direction am I going in? Here we go. Okay, so the next one should be right over here. And you all know what it is because Philip already moved the slide. Okay, so we have. Oh, yeah. Oh, I see what I did. I gave it the wrong title. Wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. That's nothing. Okay, so that's Blackburn Hall as it originally was. It wasn't called Blackburn Hall. It was actually called the Blackburn Memorial Building. It was built in 1932. Harriet F. Blackburn Nevins, who was a philanthropist, and she didn't live in Walpole anymore, but her parents had lived here for a great long time. And she gave the town $50,000 to build a memorial building for the town use in memory of her mother and father, George and Nancy H. Blackburn. At its dedication, it was known as I said, the Blackburn Memorial Building. I want you to note the distinctive chimneys. Okay. Okay. Yep. It's now referred to, we all call it Blackburn Hall. It's hosted dances, concerts, blood drives, election polls, flu vaccine clinics, you name it. It's been over there. When I was a kid, my Boy Scout troop met in the basement when it was practically one big room. It's now home to the town's recreation department. It's undergone tons of renovations over the years. I mean, the main large room, there was no other way out of it. So now some of the windows have been replaced with doors and little staircases to make a fire escape. This front area was recently redone a little bit, and it's probably redone at least 5-6 times in my lifetime. Do you notice the big difference? The tree? Well, there is a tree, yes, but the other, I thought I heard it somewhere. The chimneys are gone. Somebody asked me why, because they re-roofed it a few years back. At one time, I can remember the fireplaces downstairs on the bottom floor. But could you go back one slide? Those are very awkward chimneys. They're at the base because the fireplaces were built into the wall, and they're close down to basically the gutter line. Re-roofing this thing and maintaining that roof was somewhat of a nightmare. When it finally got re-roofed again, they put a new type of roof on it and so forth. Trying to save, those chimneys are very tall, and keeping them in healthy condition so that they don't fall over in a windstorm, so forth, it would have been a viciously expensive thing and a nightmare. And obviously nobody was lighting fires in the basement anymore. So they removed them all and replaced it with a single roof, because we're all used to seeing chimneys that are up here, not way down there. So it's very, very difficult to maintain them and keep them going. Okay, so let's see. Okay, now I gotta, yep. We all remember this correctly? Yeah, this was, it says Station 1, circa 1910. Yep. It was built in 1901. Remember, they didn't have a fire station. They didn't even have a fire department until like the late 1800s, mostly just volunteers. You start seeing like companies referred to, and then engineers, and then it started suddenly in the town reports and so forth. You started to see the term fire department as they came into being. But up until this was built in 1901, most of this stuff was in Mrs. Clapp's barn. Interestingly enough, anyone know where this was? You're really warm. It was definitely in Walpole. Does anyone know where? No, East Walpole is a separate station. No, South Walpole is a separate station. I actually have a photograph that was taken in 1951, I believe, that shows the background, and you would have been able to see exactly where it is. No, that's not the photo. Oh, yeah. Did anyone recognize that? This is the KFC. Could you flip back for a second? Notice it's the same building. It was moved. Right behind it in the photograph I have from the 1951, I believe it is, town report, you can see the brand new fire police station that was built immediately behind Town Hall, the one they tore down a few years ago and replaced. It sits right behind it. This was in use right up to the 1950s, and in one of the town meeting reports, the town voted to get bids to either sell it, move it, or dismantle it, to get rid of it, because you could see the brand new station immediately behind it. This was sort of right where, remember, the police department used to be on the left-hand end of that building, and like the first bay, this was right in front of that, literally, because you could see the brand new building in the other photograph, and this thing was much older in that picture. So obviously they didn't dismantle it. I'd love to know if it was sold, given away. I bet you anything it was just sort of a deal like, folks, you can have it if you move it down the street. So they simply moved it further down the street. Knights of Columbus turned it around.
I saw them bring it down.
You remember that? That really? Did they did it by truck, I assume. Yeah. I'm not surprised, because when you see the photograph of it that was taken just before they moved it, it looked pretty darn rickety to me. I'm thinking they must have been walking down all I could think of was like the Amish moving a barn, like 300 of them each holding a corner and walking down the street. Yeah. So it was, they found a way. So, yep.
Just want to mention that we have 6 of the pictures on the table here. So we have, including one of these, so there's 3 of the before, the then pictures, and 3 of the now pictures. So if you want to look at them later on, these are the actual pictures that we hung in the library. And Mary O'Brien took this picture. So Mary and I took half the pictures each of the now pictures.
Okay, I think we're ready for the next one. This is one of my favorites because it's part of a much, much larger story. I have to touch on some of it, but I wish we had like more photographs and we could do an hour on this alone and the extended story. Does anybody know what this is? No. You're gonna, when we get to the now picture, you're gonna be shocked to see where it was. First off, this was the Bradford Lewis Community's house. Bradford Lewis, as many people know, he lived from 1819 to 1909, owned a variety of mills with he and his brother and later his son. They owned mills in and around the town. Much of it became Kendall Mills later on. His first home was up on Plimpton Street, and in order to be closer to his mills, one of which was near it, he purchased the old Payson farm. This is Reverend Payson, who was one of the early ministers in Walpole. He purchased the farm to be closer to his businesses in 1865. He was the minister of the first church that was still on the common at that point. At the point where Payson purchased the property. Bradford Lewis was a deacon of the Orthodox Congregational Church, which at this point was on East Street. Where Gallows Flowers we already established. In 1919, after he passed away, 10 years after he passed away, his family renovated the house. It was a beautiful house, barns, etc., and they renovated it into this. And They called it the Bradford Lewis Community House. It was basically like a YMCA and more. It had meeting rooms, it had library, it had basketball courts, it had all sorts of meeting rooms. Weddings were held there. There were fields for playing on. People could go and use it, etc. And they gave it to the Congregational Church, which used it for all sorts of public things, everything. It was just a beautiful place. There's many more photographs of this building, and it was gorgeous. They had, there was a gymnasium. It was available for weddings, celebrations. In 1927, it became the property of the newly formed United Church. For those who don't know, the United Church, which is up on Common Street near the post office, this Congregational Church, and the Methodist Church, which was built on the old school site, all came together. The church that was up by the post office was the Unitarian Church by this point. There's such a long story that goes with this, how one church became this Congregational. Anyway, the three churches came together, and this was turned over because since it was owned by the Congregational Church, it now became part of the three churches as United Church. And it was used for that. When they came together, they all decided to meet at the Congregational Church because it was the largest of the three. Can we... That's where it was. This whole stretch from there up to the Passel of buildings, the bit long building with the various storefronts and such, was the Payson Farm, and later the Bradford Lewis property, and later the big house and so forth and barn were on this piece of property. And of course, yep. Yeah, the new building is going to be apartments with one-bedroom apartments and retail on the floor. But, yeah, you all recognize it, right? And right beyond it is Conrad's and so forth. I believe is the next slide, the next portion of this. Okay, so how did we get to this point? Well, in 1939, as we know, 1938, the hurricane basically destroyed the Congregational Church, where United Church was then meeting. Because when they came together in 27, they used that one. It was the largest building. Well, the hurricane basically destroyed it. The entire steeple came down. It was just beyond redemption. They wound up selling the building to Joe Gallo, who built a flower shop there and so forth. This was right across the street. You only had to walk to the corner and cross the street to get to the Bradford Lewis property. They decided to sell that too because they were going to have to do a lot of repairs or building, whatever. I'm trying to find Louis Bomar. I was looking for his name. He wanted to build a Gulf gas station at the time, so he bought the land from them. He leased some of the land to the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company. What's the A&P now? How many remember people? What is it? CVS. Okay, there's a little surprise coming. Some of you might remember it, but when we get to that, so Bomar leased some of the land that he had bought to them to build a store, and he built it as that. In the 80s, of course, the Gulf Station was sold and became a series of banks. Yeah, it was something else before then. Foxborough. And wasn't the Hancock there temporarily when they moved out of the corner of the Conrad's building? And then they were bought by Foxborough, I think. And then every bank in Walpole was consumed by another bank at some point, so it's hard to keep track. You'd need like a family chart for that. And the building right next to it, anybody remember that? I remember what it was when I was a kid. Archer Kent was in the back corner on the far side, but the whole middle part before the Chinese restaurant. What was it? Nope. Before Dixon's 5 and 10. It was there for like forever. Dixon's. Are you kid? Every kid in Walpole my age lived for Dixon's. It was because they had everything. They had goldfish. You could buy toys there. You could buy Matchbox cars. You could everything. You could buy cheap gifts for your parents at Christmas time in the gift department. It had everything you wanted. It was an incredible store. So that was home to that, and then a succession of other businesses when it closed. Actually, when it was only closed for a little while, its former manager, whose name was Robert Goffigan, I actually remember it, he bought it from the owners and he renamed it Rogan's. He was only in business for like 2 years. Yeah, Robert Goffigan, Rogan. So strange as that is. So, and of course, here we are again. Yep. Phil, could you move back to that early slide again for 1 second? No, the next one. Oh no, you know, it's a later slide. It's a later slide. We'll come back to it. I want to talk about the Dixon's building a little bit later. Okay, and of course, here we are again. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, that same end of town. Yep. Oh, Dom's Coffee Shop. How many people remember Dom Riganese? I knew him as a kid. I loved him. Yep. There he is with the coffee shop. He and his wife Betty had a variety of businesses in the center of town. After this little building on the end was torn down, when they built the new Edgewood shopping center over on the Gulf, behind the Gulf Station and so forth, he moved his coffee shop over there. He was what was the last restaurant was in that building? Westbury Farms. That was originally Dom's Coffee Shop, and then had a succession of owners and names through the years. His wife, Betty, opened Edgewood Travel in Edgewood Plaza. Edgewood Travel, and her brother ran that forever. I think the one time I took a trip anywhere, I booked everything with Betty. I didn't travel much. And as you can see, yep, the theater is still, there's a lot of interesting things here. For one thing, they're knee deep in the water. Brandy's shoes. Yep. The Elite Theater, which was right next to TD's, what became TD's. The Elite Theater was still there in the 50s. This is, I believe, I want to say after Hurricane Diane? Or Carol. Was it Carol? Carol. They were back to back, yeah. So this was Diane, I think, the first one. So this, yep. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There were a lot of things. There was amazing. Could we see the now picture? Yep. Of course, now we've got a succession of different restaurants. The building is still here. This is the TD's building, but you can see the Elite Theater is still there, but the roof has changed. They put a different roof on it and everything. The building was renovated over the years. And there's less flooding. That storm created quite a bit. It took years for them to make the changes that have eventually, decades later, ended up with the Allen Dam project off of Washington Street. The stream that flows from Diamond Pond across the center used to be daylighted. When it would go across the back of the municipal parking lot. When I was a kid, I can remember it being open, the river passing through. Right now, it disappears under conduit at the edge of the parking lot, and it's underground all the way past Edgewood Plaza, the buildings. And it's interesting, in one of the buildings, you can see the conduit in the basement where Neponset River passes underground. I was in that building when I was in high school because a group of us were trying to raise money for a scholarship fund by seeing if we could set the world monopoly record. So we were in an empty storefront. We went down the basement to explore, and there's the giant conduit cutting at an angle following the river going under there. So that changed. So they did a lot of changes over the next 30 years because of the incredible flooding that took place there. Okay, next. Here we are. What?
They had changed some of the roads before the flood. There was no way you could get to Walpole Center without going over a bridge, under a bridge,
Yep.
through a bridge.
And in fact, it's interesting you brought that up because in one of the very long time ago, remember Ripley's Believe It or Not in the Sunday paper? Yeah, it was, and there were another one was you couldn't get out or into Walpole Center without going over or going underneath a railroad crossing or a railroad bridge, under or over one. Now it's possible to not cross railroad tracks. Yes.
Two previous pictures when you were telling us about the theater next to TV's.
Mm-hmm.
When did that stop?
Well, that was the 1950s, and I believe it was gone by the early 60s. So I would place it sometime between, what was the year of the hurricane? 1955. So sometime in that 5-year span, it disappeared. Now, a couple of other interesting things. First off, a lot of people have speculated what these guys are doing. Like, are they dragging a body? There's a laundry over here, and there's a lot of us said, well, they're just bringing their laundry in. This is the pre-wash phase. This is the same police car you could see in the other shot. Some other fun things. This is one of my personal favorites. Doug's Grill. I actually remember being in Doug's Grill. I was very small. I couldn't have been more than 4 years old, and I remember going in there with my family for lunch. And I remember being in that thing. This is the greatest place in the world. And then it was gone. And I would give anything to be able to go back to Doug's for lunch, for a hamburger. I think that's where I had my first hamburger. Simpson Springs, but Doug's Grill. Oh, what a wonderful place that was. Now this is the Dixon building, but somebody actually said this a little earlier. Was it the A&P? This is the A&P. A little hard to see, but this sign here, this is exactly the type of sign that A&P stores used in the 40s and 50s. They didn't go to the other look with the cupola and the weather vane and so forth until well after that. So this was the building they built at that time. A few years later, they built, I think it was 1960 or 61, they built the new A&P behind it that is now the CVS. And this became other businesses. Maybe somebody can help me out with this because I tried to find this out in January. Obviously, at the time, I was like 4.5 years old, 4.5 years old. Before any of those stores were there, I remember driving by that with my parents at different times, and the whole building seemed to be used by one big business that had orange and blue vans. I always had the impression it was some sort of cleaning company, cleaners, or laundry, something like that, laundry service. Anybody have any recollection of that? Gulf was orange and blue, but that was further up. But they had orange and blue vans all around. They were the little vans that laundry services used to use. And then there was a fire, and that was the end of it. And the next thing you knew, when they repaired the building, Dixon's was in there, which actually consumed most of the building. Jenny's Cleaner or J&A Cleaners was in the back, and on the corner was the Hancock Bank. Whereas Dixon's actually had that back side, the front side, and the side where 7-Eleven was part of Dixon's. They had 3 different doorways to get into the building. 7-Eleven was the gift department. And you used to have to go in the other. They always kept that door locked, but so that was part of it. It was a great thing. But nobody remembers what that business. It's been driving me crazy ever since. What was in there before the fire? So it was only there evidently for a few years. All right, now I have to see where I'm at. Okay.
This is the now picture.
Oh, that's the now picture. Yes, we're familiar with this. Apartments and retail space, all for rent. I think they may have rented an apartment.
What is the name of the building on the right corner?
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
I actually, it has been there a long time. It's the Plimpton Block. You're right. It's the Plimpton Block. It was there a very long time. It's still there. Somewhere I have a note, not on these things, but I do have a note of when that was built. But it's not in this stuff because it wasn't part of this show. It was Plimpton. I do have it. Plimpton Block, built in 1880. Yeah, it was built like a year before the townhouse was built. Okay. Okay. Union Train Station. Yep. Before the first, this is actually the second Union Train Station. The first one burned. There's a lot of buildings that burned. The original one was built in 1883. It was designed with a Y configuration because there's Walpole was kind of unique at that time. There were two major train lines going in two different directions. So it was built in sort of a Y configuration so they could look down both tracks. Destroyed in fire in 1893. Construction of the present station, which is the one in here, began in August of the same year. These sides were more of a V, so it'd have a better view of all four directions for the crisscrossing tracks, freight and passenger lines. The tower was lower than the original because they didn't have the previous functions that the previous station did. There was an interlocking tower next to it, which was torn down in the 1940s, and they did most of the control from there. And by later on, after the 40s, they had much more sophisticated controls, so it could be done from the station. They didn't really need it. One of my more interesting things is this is the freight station, which was torn down a number of years ago. One of the things that I was always curious about this, because I had once come across a reference in somewhere that said the old East Walpole passenger train station was moved, not torn down. And very, very little information about it. But there were a couple of photographs of it. It used to stand, everyone know where the Sharon Credit Union is, in that sort of crisscrossing between the old railroad bridge and tracks that used to be there. It was right there because the railroad tracks used to go there for the East Branch line, which went out of business and became a freight line for a while. When you look at the pictures, this building, the structure and roof line of this building is identical. There are some differences, like the overhangs were removed and so forth, but you can see that I think that's what it was, because everything I looked at, comparing the relative size, the shape of the roof, various features of it, they took some things off, like the big overhangs, but it looks like that's the building that they moved. And there was some like storage sheds attached to it that were moved, and they moved. I'm pretty certain that that's what they moved there. So it's a striking resemblance to the East Walpole Station. Okay, and there it is in the modern. This was.
I was reluctant to stand in the middle of the tracks.
The lengths that this man has gone to risk his carcass for you. I'd have been afraid to do that. This was, and I told this story in January or February, whenever we did it. This was cleaned and repainted in 1975 by a local group called Station Renewal 75, which was organized by a local resident like Walpole boy and his friends, who were all railroad buffs, and he worked for the MBTA at the time. And they met in the basement of Herb Lewis Insurance Agency because his best friend and one of the members was one of the family. Dave Wakefield. Dave Wakefield went to his teenage neighbor, who was also a railroad buff, Tom Coughlin, and they invited him to join. And they said, "You know anybody else?" And he said, "Yeah, because my grandfather used to work for a railroad, and I was kind of a railroad buff." And so he called me up and said, "You want to come to a meeting?" So we're meeting down the basement of Lewis Insurance and organizing this thing. So it took months to organize. Yeah, we were like the only two teenagers. We were sort of honorary Cub Scout members, I guess. The commission, the historical commission, placed a sign on it. It was in honor of its legacy, and there was a picture in the Walpole Times of the sign being nailed up. But first off, it was done in the middle of, really early in the morning, because there were a lot of commuters there to get bodies in the pictures. And the photograph in the Times was my buddy Tom, who was much shorter than me, bravely holding the sign against the wall while I'm leaning over him with a hammer and a nail to hammer it in. So the two of us were in that picture. So more improvements were made in the 70s. A lot of things were removed from the grounds and so forth. And that's the way it is now. Okay, where are we next? Okay, this one should be, a lot of people may recognize this, except for the removal of the barn. Anyone know what it is? It is the Historical Society home, the Deacon Willard Lewis house. You can see there's another barn and other buildings over here. Right here is where the Episcopal Church is. You can see a couple of people there. You can see people there. You can see the big barn and the fence and so forth. The one that was next to it, or this one? Yeah. It's in the. It was the Deacon Willard Lewis house was built in it was bought by Deacon Willard Lewis in 1863. It was built in 1826 by Horatio Wood. In the 70s. A lot of people might remember it as the Big Red House. A realtor was leasing it and painted the entire house bright red for a period of time. But for a long time, it was actually owned by Kendall Mills. At one time, it served as housing for some of the employees. For a long time, it was actually like a commissary, a restaurant where employees could go get lunch. Or on the late shift get dinner. They actually served dinner in there when Kendall owned it for quite a period of time. Right next to it, right beside it, which is now gone, is the Runnels Hartshorn house, which was torn down. And then I don't know how. I was in high school at the time. There was a big controversy because the Kendall Company, their parking lot obviously is right behind this. And a lot of people aren't aware of it, but there was a street that ran right through it. Yeah, so the street ran right through their parking lot, and they wanted to get rid of the street. Elm Street back then, do you all remember that Elm Street was one way for a long time? Yeah, you used to have to go up the other street. What was it, Depot Street, through the middle of the parking lot. And so they went to the town and said, listen, we'll give you these properties, but what we want you to do is widen Elm Street, make it two-way, and give us Depot Street. And I remember this because it was in the Walpole Times. This battle went back and forth for like 2 years. The debate back and forth, and it's an incredibly convoluted story. I'd probably have to spend a month researching it to get the full thing. But in the end, the town ended up with both properties. And theoretically, Depot Street became part of Kendall, although Depot Street remained on the books for at least 2 decades after that. But what was really odd about it, the shameful thing, is the Hartshorn house was part of it, the deal. They suggested tearing down the Hartshorn house so they could widen Elm Street. And it was discovered that it wasn't actually necessary because the street, there was enough room there without tearing down the house to widen Elm Street, enough to make it two-way. So the whole agreement went through, and so they ended up with the land. Unfortunately, at the very end of this, as everything was being finalized, Kendall tore down the house right at the very end, as it was after it was all agreed on, and Kendall came in and tore down the house, which was completely unnecessary because they had more than enough room to widen Elm Street, which they did. So the town got the property, but they lost the house. Yes, there was a school on the property which they believed that the Hartshorn house wasn't part of it or wasn't it, but they believed that it was moved backwards and used by Hart. It was on the Hartshorn property, and Hartshorn built the house and then added on to it because his daughter got married and they were living there too, and they enlarged the house. But it's believed that the schoolhouse was further up. In fact, there's some speculation because there was a door originally on the far right side of the Deacon Willard house that they thought led into it. But there's a lot of historical writings on it from memories of people at the time, but that were contemporary and do remember it and live there. But there's a lot of conflict between what one person remembered and somebody else remembered. So even the contemporary information, it doesn't quite agree. So for years, people tried to figure it out. So, but it was definitely on that property somewhere at some point, and most likely was moved backwards and used before it became parking lot, something like that. So yes.
Just to know, this is, I think, the oldest picture in the collection, and it's from a glass slide.
Yes. Did everyone hear that? This notice the border around it. This, as Philip said, this is the oldest photograph in the collection, and it was recreated from a glass slide, early photography, which is why you can see, and this predates the Episcopal Church. It is. You can see the granite posts and rail were still around the common. The granite posts and picket fence were still around the house. And the dirt road. Yep. And you can actually see how much higher the land was on the common. A lot of that was built up for the roadway these days. Yeah, thank you. I forgot about that. Okay. And we have the modern day picture. Obviously, a lot of other things are gone, but let me make sure I've got all the right pieces. My little book just fell apart. Okay, so let's see. Anything else I want to add to it? Nope, I got everything out. Okay.
Just to know, we're not quite halfway through.
Okay.
So I don't know how the time-wise we need to go.
Right. Some of these are pretty short, I think. Some of these were coming up. I can talk a lot faster than this. Okay. Okay. Epiphany Church was originally built in 1896. There is some misconception. When you read some of the old articles and so forth, some people referred to it as St. Mark's. It was not St. Mark's. They referred to it as Epiphany in the planning stages, right from the beginning, the Episcopal Society. You can see, of course, the houses in the background and so forth. You can see the pond, Lewis Pond in the background. It was quite modest at the time they built it, although it had an incredibly steep roof. And, of course, it is famous for the beloved village fair. Every one of us kids waited all year long waited for the village fair. So, yeah, it was referred to as St. Mark's, but that's probably confusion because they had support from other churches, including the one in Foxborough. They had support from several Methodist churches that were also called St. Mark's. So I think that's where some of the confusion came in, but it was always Epiphany. Okay. So, in 1956, they renovated and enlarged it significantly. They added the front on, they added the back, they added quite a bit to it. Because of the extra construction, and as we already saw, it has an incredibly tall, steep roof that put a lot of pressure on the sidewalls. But there was also street work done and work on the foundation to add on to it. The walls started to bulge from the weight of the roof. So they added these buttresses to protected. So in 1962, the buttresses were added. It gives the building a rather distinctive look. And the church has them inspected every year. One of the members of the Historical Society told me after the last time we gave this presentation, why didn't you speak up? He said, they actually have engineers come in every year to check on these. They come in and they measure it and everything, see if there's been any change. But it'll always, to me, it'll be the home of the village fair. Yep. Yep. All right. Oh, this one I love. Look at that building. The Walpole, Joseph Greenwood's Walpole Garage. It was located on Main Street. It first opened in 1906. It was somewhere around 1906 and 1909. That was the Wrentham Road. It was actually considered the main highway at that time. It was a busy state road between Rhode Island and Boston. This was one of the main routes. Route 1 was still very broken up and strange at that time. It was very successful. He was the right guy at the right time. If I've seen there's other pictures of this sign that have everything. They did everything to do with cars. They sold them, they bought them, they stored them, they rented them, they painted them, they fixed them, they sold parts for them. You name it, and they did it. And they had even more signage telling about this. The place was gorgeous. They actually added on to it after a few years. They were so successful, they actually were a Maxwell dealership. Anybody know what was the most famous Maxwell? Jack Benny's Maxwell. Jack Benny had a Maxwell. That's probably the only time people have heard of Maxwell automobiles is from the Jack Benny show. And they actually added on to this building and made it longer. It was incredible looking, enlarged around 16. In later years, Greenwood, when he wanted to retire, he sold the building to Saccone Mobile, who wanted to build a gas and service station on the site. You ready? Recognize it? Not the same building, obviously. But for those who remember this, before they added on over here, this was a gas station. Notice the big windows and everything with the beige. It was the mobile gas station. It's a little, you all know where it is.
Delaney.
No, Ted Delaney owned the Sunoco on the other side of it. Yeah, this was, Saccone owned this right up until they sold it. And a contractor bought it, and there was various things. I remember there was a car audio and alarm place in there for a few years. And then the contractor himself used it for an office and used to park his equipment here. And then the Flowers and More came in there, and they wound up adding on to it, and it became very successful. So that's where that garage stood. Yep, okay, so I guess I have nothing else to add to that. Lewis Pond, offices and so forth. You all know where this is, obviously. This poor little pond is actually part of the Neponset River. And notice the bucolic little view of the rowboat with people enjoying a Sunday afternoon. If anybody's ever gone behind that building now and looked down and peeked through the bushes and chain link fence and all that, it doesn't look like that anymore. But at one time, this was a really beautiful spot. They were much more conducive to this sort of thing way back when. How many people know what's to the right of that Flowers and More now? Napper Tandy's. Who remembers what it was a long time ago? Before Pete's Dream. Peter Attire, who worked with my mother, bought it back in the 80s, 70s. What was it? Petrarca's Steakhouse and 10-Pin Lanes, which were downstairs. As a child, that was my favorite place. When February vacation, would walk all the way down to the center of town with like $2, and we could bowl all day long for like 10 cents a string, something like that. And it had a Fanta machine. Fanta was like 15 cents. It was great. I know, look at me. I sound like my father talking about the 30s, growing up during the Depression. And it was wonderful. And the Petrarca family owned it. But before it was Petrarca's Steakhouse, when Petrarca bought it, it was called or when Petrarca first opened it, it wasn't Petrarca's Steakhouse. It was the 10-Pin Inn, because it had the bowling and the restaurant, but the back of it was all beautifully landscaped, and I made a list. They had the picnic ground that went right down to the water, swings, tables, benches, picnic area, offered boat rides on Sundays. I came across an advertisement for Petrarca's 10-Pin Inn with all the family activities you could do on the weekend there, and it was all beautifully landscaped. And in fact, I actually remember the pond better as a child from the village fair. Back then, behind Epiphany, it was all clean. The lawn went right down. Yep. Do you remember the little dock? And you could go for a boat ride at the village fair for a dime, and went around. So it's very different from the way it is now. Yeah. Philip had to brave all this stuff, and it was a scramble. If you tried to park behind either of those buildings now, there's like gravel piles, dumpsters, various pieces of broken fence, equipment, and a million brambles. It's like you're taking your life in your hands to get to the edge of the water if you could. But back then, it was a beautifully manicured area.
If you look very closely at the bridge on the right, mid right, you see that you see where the water goes underneath. And if you see there, you see the same. It's very small, but you'll see the same thing. Yeah.
Right there. Very different. Get dry. Okay. So very different than it was back in those days. All righty. This is the Colonel William Morse house, which he called Lionhurst, because of the cement lions he had on the front steps. It stood next to the Methodist Church. So what is it now? Thomas. It's the funeral home, yeah. He served in the Army during the Civil War. It was called Lionhurst because of the recumbent lions in the front. There's a third standing lion in the back. There was hundreds of elaborate stories about the history of the lions, how when they were widening the Charles River estuary for the naval yard, how they found them in the river and dredged them up and all that, and he brought one home and another one went to Ohio and all. There are actually articles written by people in Ohio and other places. The history of this is so convoluted. And a lot of it seems because he was a real storyteller. And his daughter eventually became a pretty good storyteller too. But the fact of the matter is, those lions in the front were not part of that, which a lot of people assume because there were two of them. And he found two theoretically, and one went to some other state and is somewhere else. But they showed up in a catalog in the 1880s of let me see, I have it written down somewhere. The recumbent lions first appeared in the 1867 catalog of Robert Wood ornamental ironwork. So that's where they came from when he built the house. But there is possibly some truth to the story because the standing lion in the rear is not one of Robert Wood's ornamentals. So it's possible because there's a standing lion elsewhere, but nobody has ever, because he was such a storyteller, his daughter was such a storyteller, and one of the people who ended up with what they think is the similar lion was such a storyteller, you couldn't go over the truth with a divining rod and find it. So he was also somebody who pushed really hard for the to have Epiphany Church built. Let's see, anything else?
Kids in the front.
Oh,
Just we worked really hard in the scan to bring out the figures on the front.
yeah,
The kids, there's some kind of activity going on.
right. Yeah, they're all quite dressed up, as opposed to the women in the background who are very formally dressed for the day.
Some of the scans are better than the original photographs. Because in the scanning, you can bring out things that you can't just see in the...
Right, the paper print, yeah. Okay. And there it is today as the funeral home. I believe they've got a lion themselves that they purchased and put there. There was some talk that the original recumbent lions actually went next door to Dr. DeRoma's at some point, that he gave them to Dr. DeRoma. So the family did. So not really sure, but okay. How many know what this is? The dedication of the town forest. Right near this, at the back of the football field, which is right next to the John Blackburn property near the White Bridge, and the Blake family property. After his death, his daughter sold the land to Horace Biggs, who owned the house where the co-op is today, who sold it to George Plimpton, who came to own several hundred other acres along there, not the least of which was Pocahontas Street, where I first started, that's where my house was, where I escaped the back into the town forest. So the town forest and all that, a lot of that land was gifted to the Plimptons. Charles Sumner Bird was also involved. He had traveled to Europe, and he was very interested in the concept of managed forests, where a town could benefit from lumber and so forth, forest products. So he convinced George Plimpton of the importance, and he agreed to donate the first 50 acres and added to the land the town already owned there, and other people he convinced to donate parcels. It eventually had 150 acres for that portion of the town forest. This was delayed by World War I because they couldn't get the saplings. They couldn't get the ships to deliver the saplings during the war. So it actually got delayed for quite a while. So it was officially created in 1916. It was attended by Charles Bird, George Plimpton, and then Lieutenant Governor Calvin Coolidge. 900 children planted 1,000 white pine seedlings in the town forest. Yeah. The marker is not actually on the site where this actually happened. It was moved when the fields were enlarged and repositioned many years ago. So it was when they added the track and all that. So the marker got moved backwards. I remember as a child, that whole grove right behind the football field was a beautiful pine grove, and the town actually had picnic tables all throughout it back then. I remember they have a scouting weekend there, with all the scout troops would be planted all through the forest doing demonstrations and things like that. And it was right near the Blake family. You could see this now. Right down to the side was the Blake family a home and graveyard, which is still there. So it's still pretty interesting. What time of year did you take the same thing? It was in the winter?
Mary O'Brien took this one.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, I can't remember exactly, but it would have been in the fall, probably, late fall 2024.
Okay. Okay. South Walpole Methodist Church, built in 1830. Back then, it was known as the Walpole and Foxborough Methodist Society. Current church was built in 1846. The building was later moved a short distance, and the parsonage built on the first site. Wait a minute. Yeah, that's it. Clock was installed in 1876. There were numerous renovations and additions made over the year. To the side of this is Billings Hall and Hamilton's store, which served as a post office in South Walpole at the time. Polly Tavern is just off the side. It's just out of the picture. You can't see it. But Polly Tavern, which was a historic place, that's the one where Lafayette was supposedly stopped and stayed. And President Monroe also visited there on the return of his previous trip. Yeah. The Foxborough border was on the other side of the turnpike until 1833, and then it was switched to this side. So that was why it was Walpole Foxborough. The border was on the other side, over near what is now Route 1, and they moved the border, which it was on this side. So this was originally part of Foxborough. When they moved it to the other side, which is right over close to Route 1, it became part of Walpole. Okay, as you can see, The Hamilton store and the tavern were torn down, I believe, in the 60s. And they built a new parsonage there and so forth. Let me see if I have any other notes on that of interest. And you can just make out the edge of the edge of that. Yeah, it was in the early 1960s. Okay, next. Okay, Fuller Tavern. Yeah, Stephen Fuller Tavern, built across the street from Polly Tavern in 1807. It was called the Halfway House due to its position halfway between Boston and Providence, which is why those inns did so well. It was halfway point where people either wanted to get lunch or dinner or spend the night or something. They were tired. It was a perfect place for the coaches that ran between Providence and Boston. Daytime coaches often arrived at the same time of day. So Polly and Stephen Fuller, who owned Polly across the street and Stephen Fuller, they worked out a compromise that one of them would have the lunches for the carriages that were southbound, and one of them would have lunches for the coaches that were northbound. So they split up the business nicely that way. Interestingly, after Nathaniel Polly's death, Stephen Fuller purchased it, so he owned both for a time. It became one of the most famous taverns in New England. You can see in this picture that the street tracks, the streetcar tracks were still in place. They went all the way to Foxborough at one time. I can remember my grandmother telling me about when she was little, they would take the streetcar from Norwood to Walpole, and then the one from Walpole to South Walpole and into Foxborough, because Foxborough Center, there was was famous for ladies' hats. There were, so some of you know about that. Yeah, it was like Mecca for ladies' hats at the turn of the century, and she can remember. It must have been like a all-day trip to get all the way to on streetcars, going there. But she remembered doing that. And I'm thinking, hats, I know Foxborough Center. I don't know any hats there. Interesting. Yes. I couldn't hear you. South Walpole. Do you know where the South Walpole Church is on Washington Street? That's directly across the street. So if you have the Methodist Church on your left, this is on your right, just before the little common there. And it's still there. It's now a private home. Although, in 1927, Philip Allen and George Plimpton bought it, and they restored it and reopened it. Copies of and I've read this. I've actually seen a copy of it. 1935 Thanksgiving dinner menu were posted on the internet. You've seen that. You can see them. And they ran it for a while, probably, I believe, for about 10 years, and patrons got privileges at the Old Walpole Country Club. So for a while, it actually had a second life.
Do you have the price of the Thanksgiving dinner just to compare?
I believe it's on there. I believe it is. I don't remember, no. At the point I was doing my research and going through my notes and everything, some of these sessions were like 17 hours long. So, yeah, it stayed in business till roughly 1940, and now it's a private residence. What is it? Bird Park. Yep. As we all know, Bird Park, Charles Sumner Bird and his wife created this in memory of his son. There's some Francis William Bird, Charles Sumner Bird and his wife built it in memory of their son, Francis William Bird. He died young in 1918. It was designed by John Nolan, who studied under Frederick Law Olmsted at the Harvard School of Landscape Architecture. Originally, Bird and Nolan had drawn up plans for Neponset Garden Village. It was going to be a housing development, which was intended to be housing the employees of Bird Incorporated. It was supposed to be like a picturesque little village to live in. The plan was abandoned in favor of building the memorial to his son. A visitor in 1926 wrote an article for the Walpole Times as a veritable paradise. Now the pool, and a lot of you will remember the pool, was very unique because it had a river flowing through it. It had a stream that flowed through it. the frog fountain, which you can just barely make out in this picture, and water exited at the far end under that bridge with a little waterfall. And it was meant, and he actually wrote this out, it was meant to be evocative of a perfect country swimming hole. And lots of descriptive memories of it. And like many things, time and finances took a toll on it. For a long time, the park was basically taken care of by the town to the best of their extent. But this park was, and for those who visited, friends of trustees of reservations have done a wonderful job repairing and maintaining it. But still, it's nothing compared to its original glory with the gas lanterns all through the park, the numerous stone bridges. It was extremely elaborate. But one of the things that was nearly impossible to maintain was the pond. It was used as a swimming pool. I went up there and swam, and the town ran it. But it was not something viable. It was almost impossible to keep it clean enough. The town got around this by damming the stream and draining it every week or so. And then they would clean, the fire department would hose it down and clean it because obviously mud and everything would come down the stream. And that's how they got by for years. But modern standards is just absolutely no way to make it safe to do. But I can remember it, and it was glorious. It just there was no way to make it a viable swimming pool under modern standards. So it was a shame. And of course, it had the bathhouse there. So that all fell, it stopped being used, and the bathhouse fell to vandalism, and eventually the town dismantled it. And so now the stream just flows through, and it's still just an open pond as it once was, formed a pond. It still goes under the bridge, but it's nothing compared to the way it once was. And that's unfortunate. It's one of those things, but I can understand it. It's just one of those things. How could you possibly make it a safe place? I mean, yeah. I'm surprised we didn't get something from swimming in it back then. Yeah, I'm surprised that actually, when I think about a lot of things, especially like going over the hill at age 5, it's a surprise I'm here at all. So let's see. So bird tower, generosity of the bird family again. It was a victim of arson. This was built by William Francis Bird in 1885, the one who died. It was a gathering place and meeting hall upstairs, shop space below. It quickly became the East Walpole Village Center. And at one time, this was really a genuinely little village. It housed banks, shops. East Walpole branch of Spear Hardware was located over there. Post office, U.S. Post Office was in the building. I remember when that was there. It hosted plays, lectures, meetings, concerts, banquets, and movies. St. Mary's Parish met there before the church was built. He died in 1894. Fund was raised to build the clock tower as a memorial. The first ATM I ever used was in there because there was a Bay Bank in there. And the Bird, how many people remember the Bird Park Cafe? That was great. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was a wonderful restaurant. Yeah, the same people own Bristol Square. I can never, for some reason, since Bristol Square means nothing to me, I guess I can never remember the name. Because everything else in this town, there's a history behind the name. There's at least 47 other references to it. I never knew anything Bristol anything around here. So Bristol Square Cafe, and they own one over in Mansfield. And I read an article about 2 or 3 years ago that one of the owners, she purchased this property and was planning to rebuild and put the cafe back there. But that was like 3 or 4 years ago, and I've heard nothing since, so no idea. Okay.
Note to people the water trough there, the round trough.
Oh, it's not. Oh, yeah, it is in here. It's hard to see because the snow's
just
covering
note
it.
that in the next picture,
Yeah.
that'll give you a reference point.
Yeah. So there it is. That, as we all know, that's all that's left of it today. You know, at least I'm grateful for the fact they haven't torn that down. I'm shocked that somebody has had the foresight not to tear it down. Okay, let's go to a more happy picture. Here it is back in its heyday in the 1950s. Spear Hardware's over there. All the other, you can see that all the cars, the people, trees, etc. You can see the fountain in the background. It was just a wonderful place. Do you want to go to the next one? Okay, same view nowadays again, sad view. Fountain again, you can see it now without snow all around it. There's a little park there now, or the remains of a park. You want to go to the next one? You can see what a busy place it is. There's the bus that went to Norwood and went around and everything. Look at how many people are around there. Look at how busy this is. This was a little town unto itself. East Walpole was a little village, and it was a thriving community at the time with the mills still fully involved and fully everybody employed and all that. So you could see the bus still going through, and it was incredibly busy place. And nowadays, just a crossroads.
And I just want to note that Mary O'Brien took this picture and waited a long time. There's a bus, you can see the MBTA bus. Yeah. She waited to catch in the picture to match up the
There's still a bus going.
They had MBTA buses.
Yeah. Yep. Recognize it? It's the Bird Mansion, Endine. This was Endine, the Bird Mansion. It was built by the first Francis William Bird in 1839, added on to over the years until it had roughly 40 rooms. It was not one construction project. This thing he just kept adding and adding. He married Abby Newell in 1843, and they had a number of children, including Charles Sumner Bird. His son, Francis William, which was this original Francis William's grandson, was the one that died. Family was no longer living there by the 80s. It was sold to Toll Brothers, and it burned in 2000 by vandals. I'll never forget that. Another legacy of the town lost to
Washington Street.
Between Washington Street and it's Mylod Street, yeah. When you go down Mylod Street, it basically went all the way from Washington straight across. Sorry, not Mylod's the back end of it. No, Mylod's the side end of it, yeah. But they also owned on the other side quite a distance. It was part of Ending as a farm, and they owned way up to Mylod Street, yeah.
Yeah, there's a street off of Mylod.
Right.
There's a street that goes off Mylod near the soccer fields.
Ending and Mansion.
Right. And there's another housing development further down near the railroad tracks, which was all part of the farmland. Until they built that, I used to drive my truck down, my father's big truck down. My dad would buy the hay from the field, and we would be stacking it on his tractor trailer. When it was still, that was all part of it. You had a question?
Yes, I remember the year that it was the decorator house.
Yes. That was the Junior League, wasn't it? I didn't go, and I wanted to because I wanted to see what it looked like inside. A couple of years, probably 4 or 5 years later, I was with a friend of mine and his wife and so forth, and we were hiking, and we decided to go up and see the mansion, and we're looking through the windows, and it was still, you could still see how it was left decorated. But this was years before Toll Brothers and basically. Right. And at the time, I forget why I was busy, and I kicked myself for years afterwards that I didn't go on both of those to get a first-hand look at it.
Do you think you'll be able, if you contacted the organization, or Junior League, or whatever it was, that they would have pictures that you could get from them?
That's entirely possible. John, I see you in the background. Don't look around. Do you know if we have any photographs from the Junior League? We have a book from it? Oh, that's wonderful. All right. Yeah, I have to go look at that next time. I wonder if we can contact them and maybe get rights to show some of the pictures or something. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, where are we? Yeah. It's not Carol's anymore. It was most recently the Cedar House. Yeah, but yeah, it had like 6 names since it was Carol's. Yeah, it was a Saucony station at that time. Later, it was a mobile in the 50s. I'm going to place this picture sometime in the 20s to early 30s because of the type of pumps that are there. The pumps are called Gilbarco style pumps, and they were primarily used in the 20s. Most of them were out of service by the mid 30s. So I'm guessing it's sometime around there. Unfortunately, there's no car there. No, not that would tell us anything. It was first the gas pumps went, then the store that was in there went, and then it was eventually Carol's, which was a bar room, and nobody went in there unless you were a regular. Yeah. Yeah, tin ceiling. Yeah, and I guess in his later years, I knew someone that used to frequent it, and yeah, it was one of those places you didn't tell your mother you went to go visit. And he was renowned, I guess, for at that time he was quite on in his years, and yeah. And I remember if you said anything that he didn't like, he'd bar you for a year, and you weren't allowed to go back in. So. He was quite a character, I guess. Up until the most recent one, there was where that sign is hanging. There was an old Kruger Ale sign that was there forever. Multiple owners kept it there. Just the last few owners took it down. Yeah. Okay. Next. Anyone know what it is? Its predecessor, St. Francis. Correct. It was the St. Francis Church. It was. I have a friend who's a professor of French literature, and he was at the winter one, Nick. And I asked him how Father, and I cannot pronounce it. Anyone here speak French? No. Fortunately, my friend Nick was here, and he was able to give me the pronunciation. Father Jewish, or something like that, was sent by the diocese and conducted mass in various homes around town. They purchased the land and began building. In the 1873, the basement was ready for services of this building. The finishing touches continued until 1884, so it was like a 5-year project. Father Jus, or whatever, died in January of 1901 and was buried at one of these trees over. There's a tree further in the back on the side, which was his favorite tree. He would sit under there and read all the time, and he wanted to be buried under that maple tree, and he was. Now, in order to build the new church, and I was surprised when I found this. Could you flip back for 1 second? The rectory is over to the far side. I thought they tore it down. I was surprised when I found the research. They actually, again, an example of a building being moved, a very large building. They moved the building behind the rectory to make room to build the new church. And they dismantled it after the church was finished. They actually moved it to continue using it. Yep, and Blessed Sacrament, the brick building, was dedicated in 1913. So what about the father? Okay, this is where I get to tell my favorite little story. Rumor had it, they built it, they didn't dig up the tree or anything. They cut it down and they built right over it and the grave, in theory. Not really, but they did. This is what we were all told. Going back to the 1960s, I'm a kid, And they, at that time, Blessed Sacrament had a men's and boys choir. And the boys, we also used to practice on Thursday nights. And I joined the choir because I like singing. And one of my best friends was in it, and he talked me into it. Okay, and then we go down there. And the first night they said, "Hey," and everybody's talking about the tree. You want to see it? I said, "What do you mean?" "No, I'll show you." And we go in. So we went into where they stored the choir robes, and there's a wall, and there's like hinges attached to the wall, and you see a line, and you undo the little latches and all that. And they open the door, and there's like a big black hole in the wall, and they pull out this old cord wrapped around a board and plugged it in, and there were like lights hanging. It's the underside. It's what would be the basement of the sanctuary of Blessed Sacrament. Back then, they didn't dig a foundation under this thing. They dug the foundation around the sides, continued the main foundation, all that. They left the land pretty much as it was. It's like hillocks of dirt and so forth, remnants of dried grass. Now, that we're talking 1968, I think, 67 or 68. And you could see the dried grass and all this. This is creepy. They just built the building over the front lawn. So we had to, our tour guide, we had to scramble up a big mound of dirt, and then scramble down the other side. And there on the other side is this huge maple stump. And that's when I should have noticed my friend was missing, because we knew recruits were there staring open-mouthed at the stump, and then the lights went out. And the door slammed shut. And there's four of us scrambling through the dirt and the dried grass, trying to claw our way back to find where the door is in pitch dark. That was a life's lesson. Never trust anybody who wants to show you something really special. Okay, so, and I did find out actually from somebody who's a longtime member of the church that was the tree and so forth, but they did, Father Jules, whatever, forgive me for mispronouncing your name, was moved later to a cemetery. So that was the story. Yep. Fales, organized by Louis Fales, original building built in 1898. Built and repaired specialty machines. They did machining and castings, but they specialized in certain types of machines. The two most common ones were a paper splitting machine. When the mills created huge rolls of paper, they created a machine that could be used to split them into smaller rolls. That was one of their products. And industrial sewing machines. Lewis's father, Charles Fales, invented a legendary industrial sewing machine. So they built and serviced and made parts for these, and they kept it up for a long time. After closing, the Gendominico brothers purchased the building and renovated much of it into what they called Liberty Village Mall. And there are stores there, a health club, a pool, the Comcast. It was a Comcast, I think, at the beginning. It was Comcast offices. Other businesses were in extensions. There was a small engine repair. So the building was broken up into many things. And there was even a costume company way in the back. I actually rented a gorilla costume from them once. Not for my own use, by the way. No, not even for a laugh, I wouldn't get a gorilla suit. So an entire company, and the Hockomock YMCA was there, and I loved the restaurant, the Foundry the first restaurant that was in the Foundry was wonderful, and yeah, I forget what it was. The filling station was one of them. When my wife and I got married, we had our rehearsal dinner in the filling station. So. And, of course, Finnegan's Wake, and prior to that, the Rebel Cafe were all in there. So it got off to a great start, but it had years of decline. And
made propellers for submarines.
Yes.
In the Second World War.
Yeah. Oh, they made, yeah. Yeah, they made propellers. Actually, there was a couple of buildings and a couple of companies in Walpole that stayed with that business as well.
They didn't have to go into the service as long as
They were working on that because it was considered a vital industry.
That all the time, you look in the window and see all the vets in them.
Oh, yeah.
Fabulous.
Yeah, my one of my other relatives actually worked there for a long time. So no, it was quite the place, and they called it Liberty Village. Yeah, I think that's as ugly as ugly gets.
I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, yeah, ugly as ugly gets. Do we have any more, Philip, or are we? That was it. We actually reached the end. Yeah. So and just in going through these pictures and doing the research, came across so much more stuff that's related to this. It's just fascinating. So hopefully sometime we'll go on to it, maybe another. Yep, absolutely. I'm going to turn this over to Philip.
Yeah, and I just want to say one last thing. Thanks again to Jim for really adding a lot to the history and the color. And I want to thank John Anderson and the Historical Society, because that was a joint project between the Library Friends and the Historical Society. And as I said, there are 6 pictures here in the front if you want to see the original, the prints that were actually in the display. And then I want to end with saying that we had talked with John with the possibility of doing maybe a booklet, and again we would do that with the Historical Society. They have a lot of experience doing history books of Walpole, so that might be something that we do. So again, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Jim. And